By the time I stepped into the conference room, my career had already been sentenced. The meeting was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. It was 9:37. 14 faces turned toward me, all mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-judgment. Some looked startled. Others? Smug. Like they had been waiting for the executioner to arrive. My seat, the one I had occupied every Monday for 5 years, was already taken. So I stood there, clutching my laptop like a shield, while Nathan Brenner, senior partner at Kelridge Capital, continued as if I were invisible. The truth is, we lost Solus Tech because of Lauren's inability to see the bigger picture. My name. Out loud. No warning. No private meeting. No HR present. Just a public takedown delivered like a line item on a spreadsheet. Her risk model was outdated. Her projections lacked innovation. And frankly, her communication with the client was, "Stop." That's what I wanted to say. What I almost said. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I had warned them. Repeatedly. I had stayed up until 3 a.m. running those numbers. I had flagged the shift in Solus Tech's R&D priorities before any of them even read the Q4 report. But Nathan had ignored it. And now, he was erasing me. Efficiently, brutally. Like deleting a slide from a deck that no longer fits the narrative. I finally walked to the far corner and took the only empty chair. No water, no notepad, no courtesy. If you've ever been humiliated in a room where your voice was once valued, if you've ever felt your work, your hours, your warnings vanish behind someone else's ego, then stay with me. Because what happened after that room, what they thought was the end of my story, was just the beginning of theirs. Have you ever been publicly undermined at work? If this feels familiar, drop a comment below that says, "I've been there." You're not alone and you're not powerless. I wasn't always invisible. When I joined Kelridge Capital as a junior analyst, I was introduced with the kind of careful optimism reserved for candidates with non-traditional backgrounds. No Ivy League, no family legacy in finance. Just a state school scholarship, a resume built on night shifts and second jobs, and a GPA that made recruiters double take. During my first year, I worked like someone trying to outrun a debt. Not financial, but social, cultural. A debt to every room I wasn't born into. I was always the first one in and the last one out. I asked thoughtful questions. I took notes. I triple-checked everything because I knew I wouldn't get a second chance to make a mistake. At first, they called me meticulous. Then, dependable. Words that sound like compliments, but in corporate language, mean something else. Meticulous meant I could be trusted with the dull tasks no one wanted. Dependable meant I'd never say no, even when the deadlines were unrealistic, the expectations unfair. I became the person who fixed broken models at midnight, who added context to slide decks but never got presenting rights. The one who stayed behind after client dinners to summarize conversations I wasn't invited to join. People didn't remember my last name. They remembered I made the coffee stronger. That I found a better way to organize the project drive. That I made things smoother. I was the ghost that kept the machinery running. Always present, never fully seen. Once, during a quarterly planning meeting, Nathan introduced a projection model. I watched him walk through the numbers, even fumble the logic, while I sat 2 rows back, nodding along like a stranger in my own story. When I looked around the room, no one noticed. No one ever noticed. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That if I just worked harder, stayed patient, stayed pleasant, someone would eventually say, "Lauren, you should lead this one." But 3 years passed, and that invitation never came. Instead, I watched my male colleagues leapfrog ahead. They got client lunches, conference passes, performance bonuses with my research as the foundation. Meanwhile, I got thank you emails. And once, a Starbucks gift card signed by 4 partners. There's a kind of erosion that happens quietly. Not all at once, but grain by grain. Until you wake up one morning and realize you've become something you never meant to be. Useful, but optional. Present, but replaceable. Still, I stayed. Not because I didn't see what was happening, but because I was learning. I watched how Nathan bluffed through metrics he didn't understand. How Jenna, head of client strategy, always shifted her alignment depending on the room. How Marcus, with the sharpest analytics in the firm, never dared to speak up unless someone else nodded first. And I started collecting those patterns. Not to report them, but to prepare. Because if they weren't going to see me, I'd make sure the day came when they'd have no choice. Disrespect rarely announces itself with a slam. More often, it slips in quietly camouflaged as praise, masked as policy, or buried beneath a layer of polite indifference. At Kelridge, it started as small things, like being left off email chains, then being told I should have been more proactive, or getting invited to client prep sessions but never the actual meetings. I noticed it in the way people interrupted me mid-sentence but nodded when someone else repeated my idea 5 minutes later, or how certain partners called me kiddo during presentations, as if my analysis came with training wheels. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone has to earn their stripes, right? I told myself it wasn't personal, that maybe I just needed to be louder, sharper, more polished. So I adjusted. I rehearsed harder, reworded my pitches to sound less tentative. Ken. Copied the cadence of the men in the room short, clipped, confident. I stopped second-guessing my instincts. And still, nothing changed. They kept promoting the loud ones. The bold ones. The ones who tossed around jargon with no substance but perfect suits and easy charm. Meanwhile, I kept getting the same performance feedback. You're a team player. You're extremely reliable. You keep everything running. As if my greatest strength was not being a burden. The tipping point wasn't dramatic. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I had just finished backtesting a risk model for one of our mid-cap energy portfolios, weeks of deep research, volatility mapping, and comparative simulations. I sent it to Miles, a mid-level VP, for review. 3 days later, I saw my exact finding, same structure, same conclusion on a presentation slide he delivered to senior leadership. No credit. No mention. When I asked, he said, "Oh, I assumed you wouldn't mind. You always say it's about the team." I smiled, said, "Of course," then walked back to my desk and opened a blank document. At the top, I wrote one sentence. They don't see you as a strategist. They see you as a tool. From that day on, I started keeping notes. Not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. I logged every time my ideas were dismissed in meetings but later showed up in memos under someone else's name. Every deal built on research I prepared but never got to present. Every projection I built that someone else used to close a bonus-winning quarter. And slowly, a pattern emerged. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being systematically excluded. Used, then erased. But here's the thing about patterns: once you see them, you can stop blaming yourself for not fitting in. I wasn't failing. I was simply playing by rules that weren't meant for me to win. So I stopped trying to win their game. And I started designing my own. The first time I invested outside of Kelridge, I used $1,000 from my emergency fund. It wasn't a bold move. It wasn't some cinematic moment where I shouted, "I'm taking control of my destiny." It was a quiet Tuesday night. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, laptop balanced on one knee, ramen getting cold beside me, staring at a prospectus for a startup in Milwaukee that built modular water systems for underserved rural communities. The company had no buzz, no glossy pitch deck. Just a brilliant woman named Dr. Eliza Tran, an engineer with 3 patents and a track record of making things work where big corporations had failed. Kelridge had passed on her proposal the month before, said the margins were too slim, the mission too niche. But I'd seen her projections, and I had run my own numbers. It wasn't a moonshot, it was a blueprint. So I bought in. Small. Quiet. No fanfare, no one to impress. Just instinct, data, and, frankly, frustration. That investment tripled in 9 months. I didn't tell anyone. not even my closest friend at the firm. Because at Kelridge, success only counted if it happened under their banner. Anything else was a conflict of interest. And, more importantly, I wasn't ready to explain what I was building. Not yet. Instead, I reinvested. I started carving out chunks of my paycheck bits here, tax return there. I lived small. No vacations, no shopping sprees, no delivery apps. Just spreadsheets, research, and silence. At lunch, I scanned regulatory filings and studied pitch videos on my phone with one earbud hidden under my hair. After hours, I joined founder calls, disguised as a curious potential user or freelance advisor. Weekends, I mapped trends no one at Kelridge cared about: energy access in sub-Saharan Africa, femtech startups in Latin America, sustainable construction methods in Midwestern towns forgotten by big investors. Over time, a second life began to grow beneath the surface. A shadow career. Invisible, but alive. I built a small but tight portfolio of women-led, socially resilient companies. On paper, I was still Lauren Clark, dependable analyst, the quiet one who always had the backup slide ready. But in my apartment, I was something else. A strategist. A builder. A founder of a private holding company registered in Delaware under the name North Point Equities. No one at Kelridge knew. They thought I spent weekends catching up on work or attending family weddings. And in a way, I let them think that. Because invisibility, once forced upon me, had become a weapon I could wield. What they didn't see, they couldn't stop. And what they ignored, they underestimated. The strategy wasn't just financial. It was personal. It was proof that I didn't need their permission to see potential, or to act on it. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to realize if they were blind to entire categories of innovation. Maybe they weren't just ignoring me. Maybe they were ignoring the future. And that was something I could work with. Solus Tech wasn't just another client. At first glance, it looked like a typical mid-tier energy company struggling with manufacturing costs, locked in a dated distribution model, and bleeding talent due to poor leadership. But when I dug deeper, something caught my eye. Beneath the chaos, there was real innovation. Their R&D team had developed a modular solar integration system that could change how energy was stored and deployed across residential infrastructure. It was clean, scalable, and most importantly untapped. But no one at Kelridge saw it. Not really. To the partners, Solus Tech was a short-term play. Strip it down, sell off the patents, liquidate the assets. Fast fees, quick wins, zero vision. Nathan called it capital clarity. I called it what it was. Cannibalization. I couldn't shake it. Every time I looked at the numbers, I saw something they didn't. This company didn't need to be broken up. It needed to be rebuilt with better management, a supply chain overhaul, and just enough breathing room to scale its core tech. So, I built a counter-strategy. Nights. Weekends. Early mornings before the first Zoom of the day. I wrote a full memo, 32 pages, including revised valuations, a 3-phase growth plan, and case studies from similar turnarounds. It wasn't just numbers, it was a roadmap. I submitted it to the strategy team, CCing Nathan and Jenna, our head of client relations. I didn't expect a standing ovation, but I did expect a response. What I got instead was silence. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning, I got a meeting invite. Quick touch base, Nathan's office, 9:15 a.m. When I walked in, he didn't look up. Just flicked the printed copy of my proposal across the desk. "This is completely off track," he said flatly. "We don't have time to coddle failing operations. You've wasted resources." I opened my mouth to reply, but he cut me off. "And frankly," he added, "it's concerning that you'd take this much initiative on a client that isn't your responsibility." Concerning. That was the word he used. Not impressive. Not thorough. Just concerning. I sat there, unsure whether to defend myself or thank him for the feedback. My heart was pounding, but my face didn't move. I nodded once, stood up, and left without a word. That afternoon, I received the email. Effective immediately, you are being placed on a 2-week administrative leave for strategy realignment training. It wasn't a suspension, exactly. It was corporate speak for you're on thin ice, and we're documenting it. I stared at the screen, letting the weight of it settle in. They thought they were sidelining me. What they didn't know was that they had just handed me the one thing I hadn't had in months: time. When people hear administrative leave, they imagine a break, a soft landing, a moment to regroup. For me, it was a signal. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. No more lunch breaks spent triple-checking other people's pitch decks. No more evenings rewriting executive memos, so they sounded strategic. For the first time in years, I had uninterrupted space, and I knew exactly how to use it. I opened a spreadsheet I hadn't touched in months. It contained every lead I'd quietly tracked over the past 3 years, founders I'd met in online accelerator forums, engineers who messaged me after I asked smart questions on webinars, early-stage startups Kelridge had passed on, but I never forgot. I made 27 calls in the first 3 days. Some were long shots. Others had been waiting for this. They'd seen what I'd done with my personal investments. They knew my record. One of them was Alicia Monroe, former hedge fund partner who now ran a private capital group focused on women-led infrastructure innovation. She didn't need a sales pitch. She just asked for numbers. "What's the play?" she said. I pulled up the file. Meridian Holdings, parent company of Solus Tech. Publicly traded. Underleveraged. Strained leadership. Sitting on undervalued IP that the board didn't know how to monetize. They're 40% under market value if we factor in projected IP expansion and energy regulation shifts, I said. Solus Tech is their most scalable asset, but they're treating it like deadweight. Alicia was quiet for a second. Then, "How soon do you want to move?" "Before they realize what they've given away." She laughed. "Send me the structure." I already had the holding entity prepared, North Point Equities, a private acquisition shell I had quietly registered the year before, just in case. We weren't buying Meridian outright. Not yet. We were accumulating. Quietly. Strategically. Within 10 days, I had enough soft commitments to initiate a controlling acquisition bid. Not flashy. Not hostile. Just quiet buy-ins, one after another, like falling dominoes. By the end of week 2, we had a seat at the table. The board didn't even realize what had shifted. And as for Kelridge, no one there had even bothered to check the shareholder register. To them, I was just Laurent the analyst who got too ambitious and was on temporary leave for overstepping. They didn't know I was now the architect of the move that would soon redraw the entire future of their client. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's strategic. Have you ever turned silence into opportunity? Share your story in the comments, because someone out there might need that reminder today. I came back to Kelridge on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks and one silent takeover later. The elevator ride up to the 23rd floor felt longer than usual. Same gray walls. Same soft jazz. But my hands were steady. I wasn't coming back for the job. I was coming back for the ending. At reception, my badge didn't work. I tried it twice. Lights stayed red. The security guard didn't even look up when he buzzed the door manually. "You'll need to wait here," he said flatly. "HR's on their way." I nodded. Saturday in the chair by the glass wall. The same one where I used to eat lunch alone when I first started. 15 minutes later, Brianna from HR arrived, clipboard in hand, apology already loaded on her face. "Lauren, IA. There's been a small change to your leave status. The leadership team has decided to extend it, indefinitely, while they assess your role moving forward." I didn't react. Not visibly. "Of course," I said calmly. "I'd like to collect my things." She blinked. "Oh, right, they've already been packed." We walked past the bullpen, where no one looked up. Maybe some saw me. Maybe they just didn't want to be seen seeing me. When we reached my desk, Nathan was already there. He was standing by a small cardboard box, brown, bent slightly on one side, sealed not with care but with speed. Inside, my coffee mug, a framed photo of my mother, one notebook, and the plant I'd kept on the windowsill. It was dead. The soil bone dry, leaves curled inward like they'd given up. "There's no need to go through it," Nathan said, eyes never quite meeting mine. "Everything's inside." I took the box, held it with both hands. "Will I be paid through the end of the month?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "We think it's best if we make a clean break." There was a silence. Then I asked the question I had rehearsed. "What happened with the Soulless Tech account?" His jaw tightened. A flicker of something annoyance, maybe guilt. "That's no longer your concern." I smiled. "Just enough." "Of course. Though, I'd be curious to know if they went with your liquidation strategy." He didn't answer, but the pause said everything. I turned, walked toward the elevator, my box pressed against my chest. No one followed. No one called out. And as the doors closed behind me, I didn't feel anger or fear. I felt space, because for the first time in years, I wasn't someone's employee. I wasn't support staff. I wasn't waiting for permission to act. I was already acting. And what they thought was the end of my presence was only the start of their absence. The invitation came on a Thursday morning, 3 days after I left Kelridge for the last time. It wasn't from Nathan. It came from Soulless Tech. A formal request for Kelridge's strategy team to present a revised growth plan over dinner at the Marlin, a rooftop restaurant in Midtown known more for its views than its wine list. At the bottom of the email, one line stood out. "Client has specifically requested that Lauren Clark be present for continuity." I read it twice. Then, later that day, my phone rang. Unknown number. But I knew the voice. "Lauren." Nathan said, far too cheerful, "Great news. Soulless Tech wants you at the dinner. We may have been hasty in how things ended. We'd love to have you join us again. Of course, no pressure, just observational for now." I let the pause hang in the air for a moment. "Of course," I said. "I'd be happy to attend." "Wonderful. Dress code's business formal. See you there." Click. No apology. No mention of the cardboard box. Just a man trying to patch a leaking ship without admitting the crack existed. The night of the dinner, I arrived 30 minutes early. Not because I was nervous. Because I wanted to watch the room fill around me. The hostess led me to a private dining space at the back of the restaurant, floor-to-ceiling windows, white tablecloths, city lights stretching across the skyline. My place card read, "Lauren, analyst." No last name. No title. Just enough to be included, not enough to be remembered. Paloma, Soulless Tech's new CEO, greeted me first. We'd spent the last month rebuilding her company in ways no one at Kelridge could imagine. But tonight, we were strangers again. "You're early," she said, smiling with a glint of mischief. "Nervous about the presentation?" "Just prepared," I replied. She gestured toward my seat, far end of the table, facing the door. Perfect view of the performance. 20 minutes later, the Kelridge team arrived in a coordinated pack, Nathan leading, Jenna at his shoulder, Marcus trailing with a presentation folder tucked under his arm. They saw me, hesitated just for a beat, then smiled as if we were old colleagues reconnecting at a reunion. "Lauren," Nathan said, giving a tight nod. "Glad you could join." I nodded back. He turned to Paloma. "Miss Reyes, thank you for this opportunity. We're excited to share our revised vision for Soulless Tech." All lay. The table filled. Dishes clinked. Polite laughter drifted. But no one from Kelridge asked for my input. Not a single word directed my way. To them, I was still who I had always been. Present. Silent. Forgettable. But the thing about forgetting someone, it only works if they stay forgotten. And tonight, they wouldn't get that luxury. Dinner had just reached the main course when Paloma set her fork down. The clinking of silverware quieted, conversations softened. She turned slightly in her chair and looked toward the far end of the table toward me. "Before we move to presentations," she said, her voice calm but clear, "our team had a question. Lauren, could you clarify your role in the original Solistech analysis at Kelridge?" Every head turned. Nathan froze, wineglass half raised. Jenna stiffened. Marcus blinked hard. I glanced up slowly, napkin still folded neatly on my lap. Nathan spoke first, tone too smooth, too fast. "Lauren provided support during the early stages. Some preliminary research, early-stage modeling, but the strategy work was led by our senior team." Paloma nodded. "Interesting. Because we came across a document in your internal files authored by Lauren detailing a full 3-phase recovery plan. It happens to align almost exactly with the trajectory we've followed over the past month." Silence. Tight, sharp. Nathan set his glass down. "That document was never intended for client review. It didn't meet our strategic standards. Yet somehow," Paloma continued, "it addressed every inefficiency we've since corrected, remarkably prescient for something that wasn't strategic." Jenna cleared her throat. "We're happy to walk through the revised plan." "Actually," said Marco, Paloma's COO, seated beside her, "I think we'd all benefit from hearing Lauren's current position. Lauren, would you mind sharing your relationship to Solistech's parent company?" My heart beat once. Steady. I placed my napkin beside my plate and looked across the table. "I led the investor group that acquired a controlling interest in Meridian Holdings 3 weeks ago." Jaws clenched. Knives paused mid-cut. Nathan blinked twice, trying to process. "That's impossible," he muttered. "You don't have the capital, connections?" I interrupted gently. "I built both. Quietly. Over 3 years. While doing the work you never saw and backing the companies you never valued." Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair. Jenna looked like she was calculating her next pivot. "Our group restructured Solistech based on the strategy I originally proposed at Kelridge. The results speak for themselves: 34% increase in production efficiency, a pipeline that secured 2 major grants, and a staff retention rate that's up 18% in a month." No one said a word. Until Marco added, almost casually, "And as majority owners, we're currently reevaluating all advisory partnerships." That was the real blow. Nathan's face drained of color. Jenna looked to him, searching for script. You orchestrated this?" Nathan finally asked. "No," I replied. "I recognized an opportunity. One you refused to see because it didn't look like you, sound like you, dress like you." A pause stretched over the table like a drawn breath. "And that's the thing about being overlooked," I added. "Eventually, we stop waiting to be seen and start building places where we no longer need your permission." Have you ever been underestimated only to prove them completely wrong? Drop a comment below if you've turned dismissal into something powerful. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear tonight. The room didn't recover right away. After the reveal, no one at Kelridge knew where to look. No one spoke first. Not even Nathan. Paloma cleared her throat gently and picked up her glass. "Thank you, Lauren. I believe that offers clarity." She didn't need to say more. Everyone at the table now understood exactly where the power sat. It wasn't with the ones wearing tailored suits and practiced smiles. I leaned back slightly, my fingers resting on the edge of my untouched dessert plate. I didn't need to press harder. The facts were already on the table, as exposed and irrefutable as the menu they hadn't yet opened. Then came the final detail. Marco reached into a leather folio and passed slim folders to everyone one by one. No flourish, no explanation. Inside, an updated organizational chart for Meridian Holdings, the parent company of Solistech. At the top, my name. Below it, a restructured advisory framework with one major absence. Kelridge Capital. Gone. No role. No mention. Not even a courtesy position. Nathan flipped through the pages with increasing speed, his face paling with each turn. "This can't be serious," he said, voice strained. We've had a standing relationship with Meridian for over 6 years. Which ended, Marco replied smoothly, when your firm failed to recognize the core value of its most important asset. Jenna tried to speak, but her voice faltered. She set her folder down. Harold, silent until now, finally found his voice. This feels personal. He tilted my head. It's not, I said. It's performance-based. Your team failed to see potential where it clearly existed. And now, that decision has consequences. Nathan scoffed, desperation creeping in. You're just cutting us out, after all the groundwork we laid. You laid groundwork for liquidation, I replied. We built a foundation for growth. Then I paused, looked directly at him. That's the difference. But I wasn't finished. That said, I continued, we are extending 2 offers, not to Kelridge, to individuals. Across from me, Marcus sat still, uncertain. But I wasn't looking at him. Jenna, I said evenly, your political instincts are sharp, and your client communication is refined. I believe those skills could be valuable if used with integrity. She blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment or a warning. It was both. Then I turned to the one person who hadn't said a word the entire time, but whose gaze hadn't left mine since the reveal. Harold, your work in early-stage analysis has always been accurate, even if your voice was often drowned out by louder ones. We'd like to offer you a position at Meridian's strategy division. He looked stunned. Then, something softened in his expression. Gratitude. Maybe even relief. Nathan stood abruptly. You're poaching from us now? I smiled, just a little. I'm offering opportunity. The kind I was never given. And then, calmly, I closed the folder in front of me. What you do next is up to you. But from here on out, we choose alignment over legacy. No one challenged that. The conversation shifted to coffee orders and closing pleasantries. But the real conversation, the one that would echo in boardrooms and late-night call chat, already happened. My first official day as chair of Meridian Holdings felt almost anticlimactic. No parade. No plaque. Just a new badge, a new office, and a view that overlooked the very building where Kelridge still occupied 3 floors. From this height, it looked small. My new assistant, something I still wasn't used to saying out loud, handed me a folder with onboarding notes and a list of key decisions awaiting review. At the top of the list, Solus Tech's leadership restructuring. We moved quickly. In the first week, we replaced 2 department heads who had stalled innovation for years. One of them left with a well-worded statement and a golden parachute. The other tried to argue in the exit interview, but the data spoke louder than he ever had. By week 3, we'd redirected funding toward the R&D pipeline that Kelridge once deemed idealistic. By week 5, we had our first major contract with a regional utility group. Revenue was climbing. Employee retention was stabilizing. And something unexpected started happening. People stopped holding back in meetings. Engineers who used to speak only when spoken to were now pitching ideas before coffee had even kicked in. Interns asked to shadow cross-departmental reviews. Even Harold, quiet and observant, had found his rhythm in the analytics team. His projections were accurate to the decimal. We didn't just rebuild Solus Tech. We redefined it. And along the way, I made one decision that wasn't in the original plan. I launched a mentorship initiative low-key, under the radar at first, for analysts and operators from non-traditional backgrounds. First-generation graduates, immigrants, women with technical degrees but no access to golf course networks. We paired them with senior leaders not for hand-holding, but for cross-pollination. Fresh thinking met battle-tested experience. The results were electric. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was sneaking in through the side door of success. I was holding the front door open for people who had been told they didn't belong. And yes, Kelridge noticed. Their client portfolio began to shrink. Solus Tech's absence had left a hole they couldn't patch over. Jenna eventually left the firm and took a role at a sustainability-focused investment collective, something closer to her values, or maybe just further from Nathan. Harold stayed. He was promoted after 6 months and now led Meridian's long-range scenario modeling unit. As for Nathan, last I heard, he was still at Kelridge, but no longer in charge of client strategy. Acquiescence d'émotion. Fewer panels. More silence. I didn't reach out. Didn't gloat. Because I wasn't building this to prove a point anymore. I was building what I had always wanted to find. A place where vision mattered more than volume. Where facts mattered more than flash. And where no one's worth was measured by the weight of their last name or the polish of their shoes. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a beginning. It took me a while to unpack that cardboard box. Not because there was much in it, just a few personal items from my old desk at Kelridge, but because every time I looked at it, I remembered how I felt that day. Not angry. Not even humiliated. Just done. Like a chapter had closed before I was ready to admit it had even begun. The mug was chipped. The photo of my mom had a faint coffee stain at the corner, likely from someone else's cup. And the plant? Well, that surprised me most of all. Because I didn't throw it away. I brought it home. Repotted it. Put it on the windowsill of my new office, the one with sunlight, with space, with possibility. And, slowly, it began to come back. One green sprout. Then another. Until the same plant they had left to die was now thriving. It became a quiet symbol. Not of revenge. But of return. Of what happens when you give something the right conditions to grow. Power, I've learned, isn't about volume. It's not about who can talk over whom in a meeting, or who gets the final word in an email chain. It's about clarity. Clarity of purpose. Clarity of direction. And most of all, clarity about your own worth even when no one else sees it. The most dangerous thing you can do to someone like me isn't to fire her. It's to underestimate her. Because when you erase someone who knows how to rebuild in silence, you won't see her coming the next time. You'll just find out too late that the room you once controlled now answers to her. And she won't need to raise her voice to prove it. She'll just raise the standard. So if you're watching this, and you've ever been made to feel small, overlooked, underestimated, written off, remember, your value isn't defined by recognition. It's revealed by resilience. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to keep building until the work speaks for itself. If this journey resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight silently for your seat at the table, hit that like button and subscribe. Because your story matters, and someone out there needs to hear it. The best view, after all, comes after the hardest climb.